Travels of the Ellis Arbor is an audio narrative set in the world of Bastion using 5e compatible characters. Tune in for episode 30, Spoils. A blood-curdling howl as Araquiel's form leapt from the ground, her wizard garb tearing away to reveal her true form. Covered in sackcloth and bandages, most of her form was wrapped tightly, save for her arms, her legs, and a portion of her back and shoulders. A pair of leathery, bat-like wings tore free, as did a winding tail coiled around her waist. With a shriek, she leapt into the air and bore her vicious fangs. Without a moment's hesitation, Darian knew how to respond. A fiend, he thought. Fiends he could deal with. He slid the pistol from his holster as gleaming silver bullets rattled around inside. The crew had dealt with more than their fair share of infernal entities. Whatever manifestation of the pits this creature was, his slicer pistol was more than capable of rending its hide. Critically, he had to act fast, before it had a chance to complete its rumination over the crew's bodies. No sooner had he drawn his pistol, Araquiel came down hard onto the nearby table. She fumbled for a moment before grabbing a spindle of green crystal. Verd Ethereum as it appeared, though considerably more lethal and refined. Without warning, she crashed into Darian's shoulder, perching her right hand upon his back, and before he could respond, she plunged the crystal into his shoulder blade. Deep. With the gnashing of teeth, the screams of demise, and the now throbbing sensation in his back, Darian crumbled to his knees as Araquiel took to the air once more. Seeing the onslaught of his captain, Nout turned to face the fiend, clicked his fingers, and threw 3 magical stones into the air. At once, his floating disc began to whir as it stood upright on its own, creating a shield between Araquiel and the captain. He then turned to his satchel and drew forth his javelin. As Araquiel lashed and clawed at the disc, the Ethereum clattered to the ground, shattering in a smoky haze of green. Her eyes now turned to meet the artificer, who had poised to throw his javelin in retaliation. A firm grip, he thrust it into the air, aiming squarely for the fiend. With unearthly speed, Araquiel turned just in time to adjust her trajectory. A spray of blackish-colored ichor as it pierced her abdomen, sailing past and into a nearby corner. In a flash of blue, the javelin shuddered for a moment before reappearing in Nout's hand. Expecting a retort, he held it across his small form and braced for impact. Using this assault to his advantage, Edward had veered around the edge of a nearby table, one with a myriad of spellcasting tools laid across it. He took a deep breath, levied his weapon, and fired 2 bolts of energy squarely into Araquiel's wings. The bolts burned brightly as a cascade of magical fire scored her bandages. Unfortunately, she remained unscathed, neither bolt leaving much of an impact. Her gnashing teeth and unholy shriek turned quickly into a menacing scowl. She leapt into the air once more and hurtled toward the young gunsmith. With a swift swipe of her claw, she pulled him free of the ground and slamming him into the nearby stone wall. Neither he nor the voice within him was agile enough to avoid her assault. As she pinned him firm against the wall, that same cackling voice gave way to a menacing threat.
Come now, brother, you know fire can't hurt us. What did you think would happen? A poor avatar you have chosen, so fragile and unworthy of our form. Though...
The scowl turned from hatred into curiosity.
It's so replete with potential. Yes, I could draw much from this vessel. I think I might take a token of your appreciation. Spoils from an encounter already won, don't you think?
A burst of crimson leapt from Ed's mouth, and he was helpless to stop Araquiel from plunging a long, jagged claw into his abdomen. He hung loosely for a second longer before Araquiel whispered in his ear.
Yes, your aether will be suitable. Together, we can begin my rebirth. The arrival of Caliban will soon follow.
As she drew her claw free, Edward sunk into the floor, lifeless. Darian, who had only just risen to his feet, heard all he needed to. The thought of giving in life to another horrid creature. By the soul of his gunsmith, something must be done. His hammer burned with contempt, and his pistol barrel glimmered as a fundamental purpose crept into his mind. I've heard all I need to. Your rebirth ends here. In life, in death, and rebirth. All is sacred. Abhor the necrosis. His mantra was cut short, as suddenly, erupting from one of the stationary tables, Nout had slipped more free of their bonds. Seeing Edward crumpled on the adjacent wall, an unstoppable rage filled the Myconid's body. Their spores burned red, and their forms swelled to twice, almost 3 times its size. A hefty, barbed and barreled body came hurtling into Darian's view as Morag grappled with the fiend, pulling her free from Edward's unconscious form. Darian's thoughts raced. Again, she had used him. Once more his path had crossed with the one that sought to tarnish the balance of life and death. This Araquiel, or rather the spirit within, was in direct defiance of the virtues of life and death. The domain which bound him in eternal servitude. For certain, the lady had directed him to this place. His racing thoughts mingled with a beguiling voice. That same feminine tone began to echo with his own. Should he kill her? Should he stop her? Would doing so only prove the hold that the lady had over him? Araquiel may be innocent, but the fiend within her left Edward lifeless on the ground. What choice did he have to make? No, the choice was made for him. Time and time again, his path was chosen for him. From the fateful day that he met her in the woods, to the moment he lost his prized ship in a bottle, the lady had him. A chokehold on his soul that he could never break. A noose that grew tighter with every misstep and every momentary lack of fealty. More so, his gunsmith lay unconscious, bleeding on the floor. For all her wicked wisdom, the purpose with which Darian clung was this. He had to help Edward. Not for the voice within, but for his companion, his friend. The following moments occurred slowly as he watched Mor's vengeful foray, pulling at Araquiel's arm as she lashed her tail towards their waist, pulling them in. They were evenly matched, but the chaos of their spar would make this a difficult shot. He had to take it. He didn't have the time to waste. Nout had handed him a magical scroll. Perhaps it would come in handy to stabilize Ed's wounds. A wound. Flesh. Yes, the flesh of humans is weak. More so than the flesh of creatures they battled almost ceremoniously. It was this weakness that would seal the captain's victory. He turned his pistol toward the fiendish form of Araquiel. Her flesh already bruised and battered from the onslaught of the Myconid. Caliban! His shout gave pause to both Araquiel and Mor. Her eyes glowered with hatred and pain, fixated on the death of all who opposed her. As her eyes met the barrel, a curiosity filled them. For a moment, the eyes seemed to waver, and a fragment of humanity slipped through. Your avatar is fragile, A cacophony as Darian fired. Point-blank range. It echoed through the stone room like an explosion of fireworks. Instantly, the bullet sailed across the way and found its mark. With a splatter of ichor, it pierced Araquiel's skull and sending her reeling backwards onto the floor. For a moment, she writhed in quiet pain before resting quietly in a pool of her own ichor. The silence was deafening. Not just the kind of silence one hears in acceptance, but in confusion. For a moment, the battle seemed to be against an untamable foe. Wild, vicious, and uncanny. Yet, a single silver bullet from Darian's pistol halted its malicious intent. Indeed, the flesh of a man was not a suitable form for a fiend. Without warning, her wings, her tail, and her claws began to melt. Like black sludge, they formed a tar-like goo and began to melt with the pool within, leaving only the silhouette of a human. Clad in sackcloth and caked in infernal blood, the remains of Araquiel lay silent upon the floor. Darian set to work, rifling through the pages of spell scrolls that Nout had handed him. A tap on his shoulder, and he noticed a surprisingly focused and determined Nout, handing him a vial of deep red liquid. A healing potion. Yes, this would do much better than whatever magic lay within these pages. He lifted Edward's head back, uncorked the vial, and poured the contents into his mouth. Moments passed as the captain watched Ed's grievous wounds knit together, and breath returned to the young gunsmith's lungs. Alive. Unconscious, but alive. So enamored with the revival of his companion, he'd failed to notice that Nout had slipped away. From his satchel, he pulled one of the largest scrolls from his pack and began to read from it. Turning his magical stones in hand, he began to mutter the incantations from the page. Darian had only just turned to hear the enchantment spoke before the room burst with an uncanny and brilliant light. A shout of confusion. More ducked behind a nearby table as Darian turned to meet Nout.
What is this? What magic have you conjured?
Sorry, Captain. I don't believe this is just. Araquiel was kind to us, even if the creature within was not. You would do the same for Edward, would you not? Besides.
A feeling of peculiar dread spread through the captain as a strained breath heaved from the now conscious form of Araquiel. Her bullet wounds scarred over, and her body was pulled free of the pool of ichor as she was brought to life again.
What good are these scrolls if not to use them?
That dread began to swell. A darkness and unease spread from the depths of Darian's soul and across his body to the tip of his fingers. Still, he held his pistol as his grip pressed firmly against the handle. Immediately, he was overcome by a strange, unfathomable feeling. And then, the voice spoke, clearer than a church bell or the chirping of a bird. The woman's voice echoed in his head. "Oh dear, it seemed your friend broke a rule. You know how I feel about that, don't you? I care not whether he's your ally. Your bond with me is stronger." A quiver of fear, an unnatural feeling as he felt the presence of the lady take hold of him. "You know he must be punished, whether you like it or not. Enact my judgment. Enact my vengeance. Maintain the sanctity of life and death. Shoot him." But before he could respond, Nout was already adjacent to him. Darian's eyes clouded over as he heard Nout's magical stones clink. His whole body froze, stock still, paralyzed by some spell. It was all he could do to turn to meet his eyes with Nout's. A sadness in the cyanite's face as he clutched his stones tighter.
We know, Captain. We all know about the Lady of Blood. We know the hold she has over you. I know the punishment for my actions, and she will make me your enemy. I urge you, don't come after me. Let me go. I did what was right. She didn't deserve to die, even if the lady bid it so.
Darian struggled against his magical bonds as he watched Nout pull away to the open door.
Free yourself of her, Captain. Rid yourself of her embrace. For as long as you let her deceive you, you will never be rid of your guilt. Maybe then I'll have reason to return.
He clasped the stones once more, turning them in his hand as a magical circle appeared beneath.
Take care of Ed and the others, please. Don't search for me.
Powerless to intercede, Darian watched as Nout vanished into a magical haze. All the while, the brewing, maddening contempt of the Lady of Blood screamed from within as Darian was powerless to stop it. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to all our Moon, Wedge, Crown, and Hex tier patrons for supporting us so far on this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Make sure you follow us here on YouTube, on Spotify, and on twitch.tv/lonomy. Don't forget, take care of each other.